very much for joining us again today as we continue discussing Surah al-An'am, the sixth surah of Quran that we started yesterday. So in our discussion yesterday, we noted that the surah records the incredulity or disbelief that the audience of the Messenger Muhammad alayhi salam used to experience concerning the idea of an afterlife or the idea of kitab, God sending down his word to a human prophet. And we saw how they doubted the possibility of angels and wanted to have angels sent down with the prophet. And we noted how the surah records their demand for miracles. And we also noted that in their utter disbelief about akhirah or the afterlife, they tend to have a mocking attitude towards the possibility of a day of judgment and being brought back to life and having to account for the kind of lives they've lived. And they would ask the Prophet to hasten this promised punishment. So if they would say, if what you say is true, then why don't you bring it now? Why don't you ask God to bring down the punishment on us now? So we saw how the surah responds to this mocking attitude by referring to by depicting the day of judgment and referring to the destruction of the audiences of past messengers. And then we went on to see how in other ways the surah responds to this disbelief in the idea of an afterlife or the idea of a kitab or angels or other things in the metaphysical realm. So we see that one of the features of the surah is that it introduces God as the creator. And here we see some very intelligent references to the natural world, and the idea there is that there is a reference to light and darkness, and then God would say, that is your Lord, the one who conceived this phenomenon, the one who designed this. And then we saw how the surah also talks about God's knowledge and control over the universe. We then also saw that the surah suggests, as it introduces God as the creator and asserts his knowledge and control over the universe, there we find the suggestion that herein are ayat, or signs, for those who want to see them. And then we went on to see that the surah also suggests that kitab, or God's word, is a means for messengers to warn their people, is a means for human beings to know about some of these things that belong to the metaphysical realm that are not immediately available to for us to observe. So kitab, or God's word, God's writ, is presented as the means of warning. And so there is a reference to Moses and Torah. The Torah was a means for people to know about the afterlife. And similarly, Muhammad is told that you have been given this Qur'an so you could warn the people who are your audience. And finally, we saw here that the sufficiency of ayat is asserted. The sufficiency of ayat, or signs, that Quran has, and that the universe around us presents to us, the ayat, or the signs that we see in ourselves. So basically the idea there is that whatever evidence is made available to you is enough if you wanted to discern religious truth. And another aspect of this response is identification of the mission of Muhammad with that of Abraham and other prophets. And there comes the beautiful story that Simi just talked about. And finally, we noted that the surah also records some unfounded religiosity, some strange ideas that people have about religion. And basically, it's interesting to see the contrast that on one hand, these people that Muhammad was talking to, they had these funny religious ideas that they had no basis for, and this is what those ideas are criticized for here. And on the other hand, when they're presented with this kitab, with Qur'an, and Muhammad invites them to the one and only God, now they can't believe it. Now they have all of a sudden become rational beings questioning these things. So that is an interesting contrast that we see there in the surah. On one hand, they have some unfounded religious ideas that they have subscribed to all their lives without any problems. On the other hand, when the messenger presents the truth to them, they're all of a sudden unable to believe in those things. So Simi has talked about the things that were left. Basically, much of it was covered yesterday. We were left with the story of Abraham and how he arrives at the truth, how he realizes that all these created things that he sees around him in the universe cannot be the divine. The divine has got to be the one who originated these things, who created these things. And the other thing that we did not cover yesterday was the depiction of the Day of Judgment. So even though I mentioned there is depiction of the Day of Judgment as the surah responds to this mocking attitude towards the idea of an afterlife, but some of these ayat, some of these verses that depict the Day of Judgment and how things are going to be on the day, I thought they were really awe-inspiring, so I thought maybe I would share some of those with you. So for example, in this short stretch of ayat from 27 to 32, Muhammad is told, and if you could see when these people will be gathered before the fire, and they will say, could we be returned to the world? So, and they would wish that they had not denied the ayat, they had not rejected the ayat of God that were recited to them, and they would wish that they were returned to the earth and allowed to live another life, and they would this time live a righteous life. But then God says in 28 that even if they were returned to this worldly life again, they would repeat the same mistake. And they used to say, God further records, they used to say that this life is the only life that we have, and we are not going to be raised back to life. There is no afterlife. They used to mock this idea. And then God goes on to say, and if you could see, Muhammad, when they will be presented before their Lord, and He's going to ask them, is this not the truth? And they will say, this really is the truth. And God is then going to respond, so taste then the punishment that you used to reject, that you used to dismiss. And then the next ayah goes on to tell us, indeed, people who denied the possibility of their meeting with their Lord, they have lost. When the promised hour finally takes them over, they would regret all their excesses, and they will come to bear a bad burden, something that is very bad to bear, and that is the burden of their sinful lives. And then God goes on to say that the life of this world is nothing but mere play and entertainment. And what the afterlife holds for the people of taqwa is so much better for people who are conscious of God and who try to live righteous lives. And similarly, in 93 and 94, again, beautiful depiction of the, I mean, it's not beautiful, it's awe-inspiring. The ayat are beautiful. The eloquence there is amazing. And so basically, we are told that these people who used to attribute falsehood to God, who used to come up with false religious ideas, who used to invent religion in God's name, they're going to be gathered on the Day of Judgment, and that is where they'll be in trouble. And God is going to tell human beings at that point that you have come back to us all by yourselves. You have come back all alone, just as we created you to begin with, just as you were born, without any resources attached to you, without any support. And he'll go on to say that whatever resources you had, whatever resources we had blessed you with in this worldly life, they're not there anymore with you. Those resources that kept you from responding to God's word, those resources that you were so confident about and that you thought, and this is a theme that appears again and again in Quran. The Quran suggests that our resources actually make us overconfident and dismissive of God. And we tend to think that in times of need, it is our resources that we have gathered over the years that are going to come in handy, and we forget about God's hand in our lives. So at this point, we will be told that you've come back all by yourselves, stripped of all your resources. And we do not see along with you those intercessors whose intercession you hoped for. We do not see with you those intercessors whom you thought were partners of God. And in 130, God is telling us how he's going to address the humankind and the jinn. Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal-ins, O gathering of the jinn and the human beings. Did my messengers not come to you and recite to you my ayat and warn you about this meeting today? And they will testify against themselves, and they will admit that the life of this world had deluded them. And they will bear witness that they had been among those who reject the truth. So those were some ayat that I thought I would share with you. Next, I want to talk about unfounded religiosity and what it is criticized for. So it's interesting to note that the unfounded religiosity that this surah points out, whether it is in the realm of belief or in the realm of practice and attitudes, it's interesting to note that the surah points out that these religious ideas that human beings have made up for themselves are characterized by, number one, absence of knowledge. And that occurs in verse 100 and 119, that they're not backed by knowledge. These people who made these things up, they do not have knowledge. Knowledge of the true nature of religion and knowledge of kitab. Then they're blamed elsewhere in 116 that they resort to dhann and kharsh, which means conjecture and guesswork. So these religious ideas that are deemed false by this surah and by the rest of the Quran, God says these are based on speculation, conjecture. They have no basis whatsoever. And I find that very interesting. And then 119 says that these people who come up with these ideas, they actually mislead fellow human beings based on their whims, and their desires. That is 119. That notes idlal bil aqwa, and actually other occasions in this surah probably, and elsewhere in Quran we'll see this again and again. And finally, these ideas that the surah and the rest of the Quran deems as unfounded, false religious ideas, they're criticized as false attribution to God. And this is something that God finds really offensive. The Quranic text suggests that God finds it really offensive that some people would try to blur the line between God's word and human opinion, and would speak in God's name, would invent religion in his name. And honestly, I feel this has happened even in the Islamic tradition. And this just shows that the community of believers that was charged with the responsibility of making God's word available to fellow human beings, they also missed the point in at least some ways. And that is why we see that in our tradition, there have been efforts to, knowingly or unknowingly, people intentionally or without intention, people have tried to secure authority for the body of tradition in the name of God. So Sharia, for example, is the umbrella term, the package, and people would seek authority or secure authority for Sharia in God's name, but much of what we consider Sharia, or much of the body of tradition, is actually human opinions and should be subject to revision. So, and I regularly see this, and I mean, some of you would also have noticed this. I regularly see this, that the clerical authorities in our community as well, they try to blur the line between God's word and human contributions to the tradition. And as a result, we have this problem that the body of religion has grown so much from what it was when it was presented to us. When it was presented, the way Quran presents religion to us is very different from what we know as religion today. So the Quranic religion was very simple, very straightforward. But today we have a huge package that we are presented in the name of religion, and that is problematic in many ways. And people are not really willing to reconsider, revise some of the stuff that is not relevant to our time, or that is against the demands of justice, and that sometimes goes against the spirit of Quran. So specifically, there are these clusters of ayat from 118 to 21 and then 136 to 150 that criticize some socially created prescriptions and prohibitions. So, and this again is very interesting. It's very insightful that there were these ideas that went in the name of religion, and God is criticizing them and blaming these people for attributing things to God without Him sanctioning these ideas. And for example, these verses note that the audience of Muhammad thought that some animals were not, it was not permissible for them to consume certain animals, and there were other animals that they thought they could not burden for religious reasons. So these were ideas that they had come up out of their sense of religiosity, and they were trying to do a good job in pleasing God or gods. And so they had come up with these ideas and prohibited for themselves the consumption or making use of certain animals. And then they thought some of those were permissible only for their men but not for women. So these kinds of ideas. And then they used to offer sacrifice of their sons to please some of their false deities. And by the way, the father of Muhammad had a narrow escape from one of these sacrifices. He had to be sacrificed for one of the idols in the sanctuary in Mecca, but he escaped the sacrifice by a very narrow margin. So some clerics came up with an idea basically to save him without
Can you tell the story?
I don't exactly remember the detail of the story, so maybe I can look it up again, because it's something that I've read long time ago. So, but it's available in the books of Sira. It's available in the books of Sira. Yeah. In particular, yeah. I think Leslie Hazelton has written a biography on the Prophet recently, and I remember reading that biography, and that has a very beautiful narrative of what happened on this occasion. So anyway, so basically this was also done in the name of religion, in the name of God. So these are the ideas that are being dismissed as false attribution to God and merely conjecture, merely speculation, not based on knowledge, and misleading human beings based on certain people's whims. And God goes on to tell the new community believers that why should you not consume these animals upon which you take God's name? When you have been told what kind of things are prohibited for you. So you have been told exactly what things are prohibited. Everything else is permissible. So why should you have a problem? Why should you hesitate from consuming these animals and these things? So those ideas are dismissed. And then the interesting part is that these ideas, these things that human beings tend to get obsessed with in the name of religion, these are dismissed, and then the surah tells us what God's actual will is. So our attention is redirected to the more important things, the really important things. So 151 starts like this. Tell them, O Muhammad, 151 to 153. So Muhammad is told, tell them, come on, let me tell you what your Lord has prohibited and prescribed for you. Number one, that you shall not worship others besides him, and that you will not adore or prioritize anyone or anything over God, and that you will treat your parents with ihsan or excellence. And I would like you to add on to this, because I'm just going to give a brief overview of this, and maybe you can adorn this. Okay, so and that the second thing, that you will treat your parents with ihsan, with excellence. So these are the things God is concerned with. Number three, that you will not kill your offspring for the fear of poverty. Number four, that you will refrain from shameful things, whether open or secret, whether obvious or subtle. Number five, that you will not kill someone unjustly. Number six, that you will not deprive orphans of what belongs to them. Number seven, that you will give full measure and weight when you deal with your clients, and you will not cheat them. Number eight, that you will be just when you speak, even if that goes against those near and dear to you. And finally, that my path, Muhammad is saying, that my path is the straight path, so you shall follow it. This is being presented as the core of religion, as opposed to some other things that people were obsessed with in the name of religion. These petty discussions over this thing is not permissible, this thing should not be consumed like this animal should not be burdened. we can eat this in the morning but not at night, and the men can eat this but women cannot. So these kinds of things, and these things that religion tends to deteriorate into, are dismissed, because much of that, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned with this, we should be concerned only as far as God's word actually talks about them. But when we start inventing things in that realm, then we have a problem. Then religion is deteriorating into something that is not exactly pleasing to God, and that misses the point, that changes the priorities. So I thought this is very interesting. The way these ayat start, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا أَتْلُ مَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ.
Yeah, it's like, say, come.
Come, let me tell you what your
Yeah,
Rabb
what
has prohibited for you.
because it's such a small list, right?
Yeah.
It's such important things, but such a small list. And I was
So that is all from my side. So now.
well, I want to read it again. So I want you to really. I'm just going to read it, so and then
Okay.
we can, and then I want us to talk about this. Yeah. So okay, so really, God, it's like it's very intimate. This come on, come.